Well, welcome to the official start of this Sustainable Wine Roundtable webinar on our Sustainable Viticulture Protocol. We're going to talk quite briefly about what it is and try and maintain your attention for as long as we can. So the idea in today's webinar is we're going to talk about what this is and why we've done it. I'm going to make a few comments about that, then pass over to Delaney, our head of operations, who's going to talk about what it means in practice, the practical elements of it that we've worked out so far. Then we shall hear from Anne Bousquet, CEO of Domaine Bousquet, one of the early stage supporters of this. Thank you for that, Anne. And she's going to talk about what it means for them. And then we'll talk about some early stage research we've done via Peter, and then have time for Q&A. So we'll try and be as brief as we can. So we can move into the next slide. So where did this come from? Well, those of you who have followed SWR's work all the way through since we started as Sustainable Wine with a conference in 2019, some of you who may not have followed all of it will still know, I think, that we've done a lot of work on bottle weight. We've done a lot of work on our sort of central thesis, which is the global reference framework and how that really pulls together the iteratively evolving annual statement of what is sustainability in wine. So we've been pretty busy, but about 2 years ago, or so, or actually maybe a bit more now, we thought we really need to have the right program for our producer members, and ones that not just the producers can join, but other actors in the wine trade, so that they can see what emerging best practice and sharing looks like. And one of the early stage comments we had from one of our founding members, actually, I don't think she'll mind me saying who it was. Laura Catena told me when we were getting started, when I was saying to her, well, I don't think we've achieved enough as an organization. You always worry about, can you do more? And she said, well, you're giving us the confidence to collaborate. And so with that in mind, we did a piece of research on vineyard chemistry, which Peter led, and that's available if you'd like to see it. And that was quite a focused piece of work a couple of years ago with some core founding members of SWR funding a piece of research to say, how do we collaborate on better chemistry without SWR creating a certification or a standard, or which is not what we do. We benchmark standards and we help them improve, but we're not here to create another eco label, and we're not here to tell any of you what to do. We're here to enable. There's plenty of that out there already. We're here to help you collaborate in order to achieve the benchmarks and certifications and meet the standards that you want to. And of course, we then help those improve through the global reference framework. So the idea behind this was, what kind of collaborative mechanism could we create? So if we can perhaps go to the next slide, Delaney. Thank you. And we're all aware of the drivers here, so I'm not going to read them all out. But we're all aware that regulatory burdens can be increasing in many places. The complexity of tackling climate change, the ever-evolving state of innovation in chemistry means that there's an ever more complex environment to navigate. And that's why our initial piece of research was focused around vineyard chemistry and how members can share more. We then realized we need to broaden that out a bit so that we can take that shared risk-based approach and really try and turn that into opportunity. Because in every business, money is wasted through duplicative efforts. You can have 5 or 10 or 20 or 50 different actors all trying to do the same thing in slightly different ways. But we thought, well, if we can get them to share, then we can all save money. So this is not just about risk, although that is a big factor. It's also about saving money. We're all aware that chemicals cost a lot and consultants cost a lot. And some of those chemicals and some of those consultants are absolutely brilliant and they do a great job. But if we don't have an efficient sharing mechanism, we could probably have some inefficiencies in the system in terms of use. So that was one of our central kind of approaches here, was that sharing on a global and regional basis, and trying to move initially with risk, but then into the opportunity of innovation. So next slide, please.
Just popping in really quickly here. I mean, to Toby's point about SWR is not a certification, but it's very clear that a lot of vineyards are lacking the tools to track, implement, and demonstrate sustainability effectively without pursuing certification. So we really saw, and again, like Toby mentioned, a need to have a knowledge sharing platform to encourage that. through other conversations we've had with maybe some smaller growers and, at some of the wine fairs that we've been attending this year, we've seen a strong desire to take action on sustainability, but there's also a huge sense of overwhelm. There's a lot of uncertainty on which certification's right, what approach to take, the time and investment required to actually pursue certification. So an on-ramp was needed, a practical entry point for vineyards who are looking to formalize their sustainability journey without necessarily committing to a full certification scheme immediately. At the same time, no single approach, organic, biodynamic, conventional, works across all contexts. As Toby mentioned, there's no one size fits all approach to sustainable viticulture. We also see that regulations vary by region and can be misaligned with the local conditions, might actually push certain vineyards to make decisions that have unintended environmental consequences. And a lot of frustration arises there, right? We don't want to have this sort of, again, blanket one size fits all approach. And which is why a shared risk-based approach is really critical that integrates broader viticulture practices, encourages that collaboration, and encourages vineyards to take meaningful action no matter where you're starting, whether you're at the beginning of your journey or you're a leader in the space. So again, with that, a little bit more context on the development of the protocol. So as again, Toby mentioned at the top of the webinar, we conducted a piece of research in 2023 and 2024 with our inputs working group, which consists of Cloudy Bay, Geisenheim University, Saint Michel Wine Estates, Treasury Wine Estates, and VSBT Wine Group. We conducted interviews, reviewed literature, looked at best practice. Well, I say we, Peter, a research director, did. And one of the key findings there was that, again, defining a universal or ideal set of chemical inputs for the vineyard isn't feasible due to diverse growing conditions. But what was needed was a framework, a decision-making framework that allows producers to make responsible, region-specific choices while working towards a common goal. So working along the same trajectory towards overall more sustainable practices. And that's reducing chemical inputs and slowly increasing regenerative carbon practices in the vineyard. And that original research confirmed that the industry had, supported this principles-based approach. All of the members that we interviewed for it saw a strong alignment with that. And the SVP, the Sustainable Viticulture Protocol, is building on that foundation to help make informed choices in this, broader protocol. So we've done a lot of teasing about it, but what actually is the Sustainable Viticulture Protocol? At its core, the SVP provides a common structure that enables vineyards to align on sustainability goals while retaining the flexibility to adopt practices unique to their unique terroir. The protocol is guided by 6 core principles, which again focus on practical decision-making around chemical inputs, prioritizing reduction over time. But the ultimate goal is to achieve 4 key environmental outcomes. That's protecting and improving soil health, keeping watercourses clean and chemical-free, reducing vineyard carbon emissions, and enhancing biodiversity both within vineyards and wider estates. So a brief view of those core principles. The center of it the beginning of it is vineyard mapping. So the first principle is really about understanding your vineyard, assessing soil health, disease risk, environmental factors, and applying treatments where they're really needed rather than treating the entire vineyard by default. The second one is presumption of reduction over time. The goal isn't necessarily to reach zero chemical use immediately, though in some cases it may be possible. Instead, it encourages growers to identify areas for reduction and set a trajectory towards lower inputs over time, ensuring that decisions are practical and unique for the unique vineyard conditions at hand. Next one's use the mildest chemical solution available. So not all inputs have the same impact. This principle really ensures that when intervention is necessary, growers opt for the least harmful yet effective solution, minimizing risks to workers, biodiversity, surrounding ecosystems, all of that. Then moving on to the fourth, use the least possible, even when more is legally permitted. There's often regulations often set a maximum chemical use limit, but that doesn't mean that those levels should be the norm. So this principle really ensures that chemicals are only applied at the lowest effective dosage, reducing any unnecessary exposure. The fifth one is increasing use of regenerative techniques. Many regenerative viticulture techniques, such as cover cropping, disease pressure, or composting, biodiversity corridors, etc., can naturally mitigate disease pressure and improve soil health, reducing the need for chemical intervention. And then, last but not least, plan in sort of long-term changes in the vineyard, whether that means introducing disease-resistant grape varieties, improving soil drainage, or adjusting vineyard design to help enhance resilience. There are structural changes that can help reduce chemical reliance at its source. And when changes are happening in the vineyard, it's incorporating that into the plan. So how will we actually go about achieving this? There's sort of three elements. The core part is the best practice guides, tools, and research that SWR will be conducting. That will all be informed by this knowledge sharing platform that we're building out under the protocol. So we'll be drawing on best practice from members based off of whatever region they're based in and pulling them together into these best practice reports. But in addition, we'll be doing some cross-sector research, so drawing on other industries to help inform, our approach within wine. But then, as again mentioned, collaboration is a key part of this. So we'll be hosting webinars, facilitating discussions within SVP participants within the working groups that we're organizing within this. And then also setting up an online forum so people can real-time engage and discuss on key issues and explore those solutions in more detail. And the last piece is communication. So we want to be able to highlight the best practice that SVP participants are doing. So it will be, we'll be able to communicate that externally, especially the positive viticulture aspects, and then also raising awareness about these issues more broadly. Who is the SVP actually designed for? The answer is all vineyards, whether you're conventional, organic, biodynamic, you're welcome within the SVP group. Because the SVP doesn't dictate a specific set of practices, but provides a more flexible framework that supports informed decision making. It's welcome for anyone who's engaged in sustainability. For individual growers, it offers structured support in reducing chemical inputs. Again, like I mentioned, informed by real-world case studies and experience. For retailers and distributors, it helps strengthen supply chain transparency and ensures that your suppliers are aligned on recognized sustainability standards. And then for producer groups, it helps provide a more structured way for monitoring progress across a network of growers, which is quite valuable. Then with that, I would love to welcome our a founding participant, Anne Bousquet from Domaine Bousquet, to say a few words about why she's joined up to the Sustainable Viticulture Protocol and a bit more detail on what they're doing at Domaine Bousquet in regards to responsible and sustainable viticulture.
Thank you very much, Eleni and Toby. Yes, it's all what you said is extremely important. The collaboration is extremely important. And I'm sorry, I don't have my best voice today. So collaboration, what we found out, if you can go to the next slide, please. Just a little bit about us. Yes, the local climate and terroir is extremely important and what we can do as a grower, as a vineyard, as a winery. So we are Domaine Bousquet winery in Argentina, Yucco Valley, Mendoza. We have the climate element that we have described Mendoza is very dry. So we have a desertic climate, which allows us to do organic, maybe in maybe easier way than when in wine region where it rains a lot. So when we arrived, I'm French originally. When we arrived from France in '97, we bought a farm, a land that had never been cultivated before. We understood that element of a climate that was very dry and decided immediately to do organic. That's what we can do where we are. So we planted our vines and started to harvest in the early 2000s and sold the first one, which were already certified organic by 2005, 20 years ago. And since then, all our production has been certified organic, which makes us the number one. And then in organic production in Argentina. And then it's been an evolution in terms of the way we did our manage our vineyards from organic. Then we went to biodynamic, and then back in 2022, as an evolution, like I said, we went to regenerative. Regenerative, we all got our ROC certification in 2022. We were the first one in Argentina, and the fourth one in the world, and the first one outside of the US to get it. But as I said, for us, it was a natural evolution to do this. And what we realize is that for that, you really need you can do, like you guys mentioned, all at once. It's impossible. We have the climate to be able to do organic, so we did it, but not everybody has it. We need to really study each of our terroir to see what's possible. And that's true that sometimes the certification can put a lot of pressure. So a framework, I think, like the SVP is fantastic, because it takes off a little bit the pressure of certifying, but at least start to do some steps towards more sustainability. And that's very important, because every little step we take is an improvement. And together, if we do more steps, that becomes a lot more steps, and we can advance towards a better fighting the climate change we all suffer in every single region. So our regenerative focus, we started, we got our certification in 2022, and we have we have a sustainability department with Irma, who is here attending, and who is responsible with our manager also to lead all our sustainability, organic and biodynamic initiatives, and work very closely to our vineyard management department. And this is something what we've realized at Domaine Bousquet that needs to come from the top. So I'm one of the founders of Domaine Bousquet. I'm the CEO, and this is something that we clearly explain as a strategy to all our teams, and it has to be to come from the top. It's very important to us. And as part of the strategy and the action plan we have for our regenerative focus is working very hard on the biodiversity, healthy soil, and obviously also the third pillar, which is decent work and fair pay, which is a big pillar of regenerative certification. And we are in a very rural area in Yucca Valley. When we started 26 years ago, there was no other wineries. And so we had to work all the time with the community. And this constant exchange with the community is very important, and with all the stakeholders. So that's another important pillar of being regenerative, because the way we see it is long term. So that's why any step, even if it is not certified, is at least a step in the right direction, because we're here for the long term. So concretely, and for the sake of time, we're working on biodiversity in terms of viticulture and healthy soil. And I have to say, it's a constant work in progress. We have our teams in the sustainability department and the vineyard management department constantly working together and just trying things. And we're learning every day. And some things we try and don't work so much, and we try something else. And we're trying all this in terms of course, biodynamic farming, reducing mowing, low or zero soil disturbance, and some part we reached zero soil disturbance. Compost, we've worked very hard in the past 3 years focusing on compost. This is very important, and we dedicate a lot of resources to it. This is a picture of one, we're very proud of it, of our ecological corridors. So now we have several ecological corridors throughout our vineyards, and it's so good to, again, we're testing here, we're seeing what's happening. When you let nature alone, what is happening? And we see thriving. Look at this. It's just thriving. And I have to say that this is a beautiful picture. This was completely destroyed in November by a hailstorm. A hailstorm we had on our vineyard that we had never seen such an intensity in hailstorm ever in the 27 years we've been there. So the climate change is affecting everybody. This corridor was completely destroyed, but because of the health of our soil, and we're coming back to that healthy soil, that we have seen our vines, even after the destruction of a hailstorm, thriving again. So there are also signs that when you do, organic, biodynamic, or just trying some regenerative practice, trying to get yourself healthier, it works. Your vines are more resistant. So we use a lot of cover crops. We're studying the cover crops. This one works better than the other one, with nitrogen fixing plants. And of course, animal and the plant integration to get to an ecosystem that works alone, with minimum intervention. So for us, it was a no-brainer when you guys talked about the SVP, because we've been in this journey for a long time. We part of several organizations on top of SWR, and now the SVP within SWR, and because we know it's collaboration, it's education. I do also go talk a lot to our clients, to the press, to explain all this. So that's why we're here. We want to share best practice. And again, it's localized. So maybe what works for us in Argentina and Yucca Valley might not work for other people, but by testing and collaborating in this, we can learn from each other. So collaboration is extremely important, and uniting forces to influence global standards and lead in the industry on that. Please, we still have challenges, and that's why we trying solution all the time, every single day. We used obviously everything because we are certified. We use everything within what is allowed in the organic biodynamic certifications. But still, we would like to use natural fungus, more than what we do now. So we're trying with this. We also always trying to have natural biological fertilizing method. So we're using a lot of, thanks to the compost now that we have, and we increase the amount of compost we use every year. We're trying, biological amendments, taking elements from the compost to see how we can use them and grow them. Also, it's very important to be part of a protocol like this, because we need more systematization in the industry and more benchmarking. Carbon footprint is a very important element of sustainability, and benchmarking for that is very important. We're also part of the IWCA, and we work along with IWCA. And also another challenge for us is investing in renewable energies for activities, and that's just because we are in Argentina, and it hasn't been, in the past few years, we haven't had so much access to technologies for that. And I guess that's it. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much. So if there is any question, I try to keep up the time, Delaney.
Thank you so much. And if you want to have a look at the Q&A bit while Peter is talking in a moment, and someone had a question for you just about your hectarage in Argentina. But just a quick note before I pass over to Peter, and thank you so much. That's obviously just a taste of the work that Domaine Bousquet has done over the years. And this is one of the advantages of the SVP, because we're not pushing a particular system. We are agnostic, as Delaney said. We're able to dive deep as we go to learn more from Anne and her colleagues, and to share that with you across across the SVP. So we think we'll be able to bring a breadth of experience from different areas of the world, but different approaches. And we'll be encouraging members to share as much detailed learnings as they can, including how they've overcome challenges with us. We can then share them with everybody else, and that enables learnings. So that's going to be a core part of the SVP's value over time. Now I'll hand over to Peter, who's going to talk through some initial work we've been doing in the fertilizer space. Peter.
Thanks very much indeed, Toby. And Anne, thank you very much indeed. And I think some of the things I'm going to say now will echo quite a lot some of the points you've made. As Toby said at the top of the conversation, we've done an initial piece of research, or we're partway through an initial piece of research, just to try and get a dip a toe in the water, get some sort of idea of what sort of lessons and what sort of insights we can pick up that we can then share through SVB participants. Can I have the next slide, please, Delaney? So at the moment, we're at early stages with this research. We've just had 6 feeds back so far, but as you can see, those are 6 bits of feedback from some really quite large organizations. And therefore, I think we can probably say that what's come out of this is really a good litmus test of what some of the leaders in this sort of space are doing. As Toby said, the specific area we were looking at with this was fertilizer, but there were some more broad comments about other chemical use. And so the questions asked were around priorities on sustainability, of all the issues that can be worried about, which are the ones that are front of mind, what fertilizers and chemicals are used now, how emissions calculated, and also how do different applications work. So say this is early days in the process, but I hope it illustrates what we want to try and do with SVP. And I think the key points, again, to pick up on some of the things that Anne's been saying, is that that yes, this is not an alternative to certification. Vineyards will still go, in many cases, to seek certification down the line, but sometimes that seems a very high bar. So what we're going to be able to provide through the SVP is that sort of sharing knowledge that will help people build towards that certification over time. And also, certification necessarily is geographically specific. And often, certainly what we've found from the certification bodies we've worked with so far, they're really good at sharing knowledge between people working in the same geography. But what we can do through the SVP is to say, well, actually, there's times when the growing conditions, for example, that Anne has, may actually be very different, very similar to that which someone in a different part of the world has, but can build on that. So I think there's a real sort of cross-global sharing that we can do here. Okay, so in terms of working through the sort of some of the key lessons that have emerged from the research so far, really the absolute central focus, all of the respondents, the key thing for them was soil health. It's a point that Anne made just now, but this absolutely is what they're focused on. And the logic seems to be that if you get the soil right, then everything else follows. If you get a situation where you've avoided soil salinity, you've maintained the carbon content, carbon ability to hold carbon within the soil, you've increased your organic matter. That means you get reduction of carbon, you can sequester carbon. You've got good, healthy vines that are resilient. You've then got quality and quantity of fruit. So in a sense, the real sense is that soil health is absolutely the core thing. There are other priorities as well. Reduction in chemical use. And I think what's quite interesting at the moment is that link between reducing chemicals and cost savings, because obviously, particularly at the moment, fert costs are huge. So there's a real sense that we get this right, we're actually avoiding a cost that we don't need to engage with. Water management, I mean, particularly in arid parts of the world, I mean, South Africa, Australia, how we can maintain soil health and quality, therefore be able to better manage water is a key aspect. Then biodiversity, of course, carbon reduction over time. But soil health really came through as the key priority. So how are wineries, how are growers going about doing these? And again, there was a clear focus on monitoring, a sense that there can't be or shouldn't be a one size fits all, that one really needs to understand within a vineyard, where the different needs might be in different parts of it. And here's various quotes that came from the research, really detailed soil chemical analysis to try and understand where fertilizers and other chemical inputs are needed, but also where they're not, or where there's being too much used. So again, this sense of reduction over time for soil health and for financial reasons. But really, unless you're looking at the soil health, unless you're monitoring and understanding what's going on, then you can't really start. So that really is, from a management perspective, key. But also more broadly, in terms of wider vineyard management, looking at climatic conditions, and we'll talk in a minute about management of pests and disease, and that sort of understanding the climatic conditions again in terms of having that data-driven approach was very important. And again, I think another key theme that shone through in the research so far is a constant experimentation. I mean, often wine, and indeed lots of other agricultural sectors, get criticized for being too complacent, to set in their own ways. We've done this, we've always done this, we must continue to do it. But again, a strong theme that's come through from the research so far is that no, we try anything. If there's a good enough logical argument, evidence-backed argument to try something different, we'll give it a go. And again, I think this builds on another point that we often make when we're dealing with new members coming on board, is that it doesn't need to be that moving towards or building in sustainability doesn't mean change everything. It's right, let's experiment with part of a vineyard, see how that works. If it works, great, let's apply it elsewhere. So when it comes to fertilizers, the key challenge is around synthetic nitrogen, and there's a general view that reduction of that is an a priori good thing. The challenge, of course, is it's not that let's not use that, let's use something else. Instead, there are other problems with other chemical compounds, and that again, this process of experimentation, of mixing, of trying different combinations is very much a dynamic process over time. And again, there is this point about no blanket coverage. What is needed and where. Let's be focused. Let's be intelligent about what chemicals we're using, and in many cases, we may not need any, but in other parts of the vineyard, we may need. But also, and I'm sure there's a point that Anne will sympathise with, there is just the sheer complexity of the thing. Even one respondent said that even in one vineyard, they've got 9 different soil types, and so really trying to be sensitive to that, understanding that, working with that, again, adds a level of complexity. But again, why being able to share information through SVP, I think, will be absolutely vital, because again, it saves people having to start from first principles. They can learn from what others are doing. Now, real focus on compost. I mean, again, this was really interesting. For someone like me who's not, a viticultural expert, the real focus on, right, what can we do around compost? How can we avoid artificial chemicals, use compost? Really, really area of focus, again, for all those interviewed. And again, just to look back, of those who were interviewed, there's a mix of some do organic and biodynamic, some do organic, some are conventional. So we're covering the waterfront even on just those 6. Compost seen as a way of building soil organic matter and reducing the need for synthetic fertilizers over time. But again, here some real challenges. One interviewee was saying they'd been buying composts in, but they were finding they were problematic because there were seeds in it. There were problems with salinity. So okay, but so let's produce it on site. But again, in a dry climate, you may get too much fungi in the compost. So again, there's no easy right answer to creating compost, but it does appear to be a real area of focus. And obviously, from a lot of other aspects of sustainability, is entirely to be encouraged. So again, over time, I think this is an area that we're going to need to focus on more. What ideal looks like in terms of developing compost. As I said at the top of my remarks, the focus of this little research piece is looking at fertilizer, but there were some quite interesting insights also on other chemical use, particularly in relation to pest and disease management. And there's a really clear focus on here of let's not use any chemicals at all if we can get away from it, because there's lots of other things we can do if we're clever and we plan properly. There's lots of other things we can do to avoid the use of chemicals. So, for example, in terms of pest management, using sexual confusion techniques, that seems to be a really core area of focus. And then managing disease by practical processes, by non-chemical interventions like canopy management. And again, to loop back to I think a comment that Delaney was making about one of the points of the SVP point 6, which is around design of vineyards. I was in South Africa in November last year and visited the Reineke vineyard. And one of the things that they're doing is they're building a new, or putting together a new 30-hectare vineyard. And one of the things they've been conscious of doing is using the prevailing wind that comes off False Bay from the Atlantic across the vineyard to say, right, we can use that as a way of making sure that we don't have too much of a mildew issue, because there is that natural sort of ventilation of the vineyard. So again, I think that's another case in point where being proactive around understanding what the challenges might be, understanding what the climatic issues might be, means that you can be on the front foot about avoiding the need for chemicals. That's obviously not always going to be the case. If you're, some of the vineyards we've been seeing in northern Italy and southern France this year have really suffered. But again, I think it anticipates there's the stuff that can be done in advance. So I think that's me done on that. So again, when we get to it, questions, happy to answer if I can.
Thank you, Peter. Just before we go into the next steps, but I just wanted to point out that we're aware of the conversation around emissions, but we also think that we're also aware of how complex that is. Now, I've seen research that suggests emissions from fertilizer can be anywhere between 19 and 30% of the emissions of a bottle of wine. We see a very similar range, in fact, an even larger one in packaging, because it depends how it's done and where it's done. But we are very conscious of the need for emissions reduction, that retailers and others are looking for that. And a big part of this over time will be comparing early stage and ongoing measurements and looking at what they mean and how they're done and how those can be quantified. But we didn't want to focus entirely on that initially because, as Peter and Delaney have said, and Anne has said, there's so much other stuff to be done to get us to a relatively basic level of sharing first. So in terms of next steps and how to sign up, well, we're not going to make this a big sales pitch, but we just want to show you our kind of key milestones and activities. And as we get more members on board, we will be ramping up these activities and delivering a regular timeline. The idea here, as we mentioned with case studies, is we will be sharing much more detail about what members are doing and what they're learning. This is not just a sort of academic exercise, and we'll be revising this and updating it as we go. So you can see here we'll be doing various surveys. We'll be using those research findings to inform the results that we can put out there to help you all learn and share. And then we're going to be publishing research papers. But we're also going to be encouraging our members to really engage with each other on Glue Up, which is our online community for this. That'll be an online safe space where you can share and learn and ask questions. And we get lots of members emailing us saying, what about this? What should I do about that? And one of the reasons we've put the Glue Up forum together is, well, we can help you with that. But if you can post in a group where there's 20 other people asking similar questions, you're likely to get answers much faster. So we can move into the next bit, Delaney. So yeah, how do you join? Well, it's not free, I'm afraid. So just to be absolutely clear about our funding model, we have developed a funding model that's based on revenue of members. We felt that was fairest. So the smaller you are, the less you pay. But the initial membership of SWR, just to be absolutely clear, that's what covers our operations. That's what covers our initial pieces of research. It's what covers our global reference framework and other areas in many ways. But it's what keeps the organization going. We can't do this really in-depth work and expand it and make it really useful without some additional funding. But if you're a smaller player, that initial funding, the mechanism is based on the membership mechanism, which means it doesn't have to cost very much. And of course, larger organizations, we do ask them to put a bit more money in. But what we would say is, if the CFO says why, well, it'll save you money in the first year on consultants and research alone. So we think it's pretty good value. We're happy to discuss what that means for individual members when you sign up, but you just have to send us an email, really. We'll have a quick survey, and then we'll get started. And the final bit I would say on this, perhaps before we turn into Q&A, is the earlier you engage, the more you will help us shape this. And because this is a principles-based framework and we're learning as we go, those who come on board earlier will get the chance to get the most value out of it because they'll be able to help us shape it. So that's just a call to action there, really. And here are the reasons you should join. We've mentioned these before, so I won't go into huge detail. But just as with the bottle weight accord, we celebrated and told the stories of members implementing it, we'll be doing the same with this. And that's not just about PR. We've all seen sort of random case studies of sustainability progress presented elsewhere. Well, they're fairly meaningless unless they're placed in context. But what we've been able to do with the bottle weight accord case studies and stories and narratives is put that in context of what they're trying to achieve. And that makes them valuable. And it's the same here. So it'll be PR with value, and some of it will be redacted. The simple stuff can go out to the wine media, and the more complex stuff will be retained for learning within the network. So we just a final point, I suppose. We also, as mentioned, don't see this just as a viticulture, as a producer forum. That we've had a number of retailers and other distributors who have targets, who need to show progress, who want to join. So again, with the whole of SWR, because we're an end-to-end kind of value chain organization, you'll be able to ask questions and learn as a member from people outside the producer sector as well, who will be important actors in how this gets shaped because they have their own demands, which come from stakeholders and shareholders and regulatory compliance demands. So I think that covers our slides. Happy to do Q&A. So we have got a Q&A function on the screen. I don't see any open questions. Delaney, are we able to bring people in on video if they can raise their hand? I can't see the other people here, but how should we best do the Q&A bit?
If you've got a question, drop it in the Q&A box or raise your hand. I believe I can give you video permissions if you do raise your hand. So if you want to speak up, please go ahead and do so.
And do remember, of course, we're a British organisation, so we're perfectly used to an awkward silence. So we can just sit here until one of you says something interesting. But I'm sure some of you will have questions and comments. Now's the time. So Eric, thank you. Is there a standard for soil health? Wow, that's a hell of a question.
I'll say something on that.
Okay.
The short answer is no. I mean, what we find with a lot of these things is that people kind of presume there must be something out there somewhere. We get a lot of questions about various aspects of sustainability where someone just assumes, yes, there must be a preset process out there, but there's not. And partly what we're trying to do with the work that we do is to piece together all the expertise and knowledge that is out there and say, what does that look like? Because of course, it depends on where you're starting from. I think probably where Anne's growing, I can imagine the innate quality of the soil is relatively lower than it might be in, say, parts of Southern Europe. So it's also where people are starting from or what they're working with. So again, that's not something I think we're promising that we'll come up with as an answer at some point. But I think sharing insights as to how soil health can be improved, I think is probably the pertinent question from our perspective.
Yeah, I mean, one of the big challenges, of course, with measurement of soil health is, I was talking to, when we've all met farmers who know this, you put a probe down 4 times in a year in the same bit of soil, you can get 4 different readings depending on what the weather's been like and how the soil has changed. And so, how do we turn those random findings into something useful? Well, year-on-year measurements, creating an average over a 5-year period, for example, gives you the best you're going to get possibly in that. So this is where we can, over the coming years, really help develop an average on some of these measurement side of things that can be more useful than the alternative, which is sort of random sampling. So there is a way to build up knowledge over time here, and that's in line with international best practice being used in other areas of agriculture. I see a question about indicative pricing for business. Is it based on, I'm not quite sure about that question. You might need to clarify. I mean, if you're talking about pricing of joining the SVP, well, as I mentioned, it's the same structure as our membership fees. They're all on the website. So I think if you go on the website and have a look, rather than me talk through the fee structure here, you'll be able to see it.
We've also put together a sort of joiners pack with all the key information on the SVP that you'll see is on the same event page where you registered, but will be sent out alongside the recording of this webinar for those who aren't there, which goes into a bit more detail on that. So keep an eye out for it. It's also posted on our website under the page Sustainable Viticulture Protocol.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? We've got a couple here. Electrical weeding in vineyards. I have to say, that's above my pay grade.
Now, let's have a look. Well, that sounds interesting.
What are your views on electrical weeding in vineyards? Anne, are you familiar with this at all?
No. Yeah.
No, me neither. I feel better that I don't know if you don't know.
Well, I thought that, I mean, basically the general presumption, I think, when you're looking at particularly chemical use is that weeding that doesn't involve chemicals, as in you literally they physically get plucked out, is a better thing to do from a sustainability perspective than bunging chemicals on weeds and hoping that's going to do it. Obviously, the challenge with that is there's a labor cost involved. So it's not always possible for people to do that. So therefore, something like electrical weeding, I presume by which it means you have some sort of piece of equipment that does it for you, that would seem to make sense. However, quite how you tell it what's a weed and what's not a weed may be an issue. This is why my mother doesn't let me anywhere near her garden.
No, but that's right, Peter. We use manual labor,
Yeah.
and also we now use some machines. So I don't know if this is
I think that's right.
this qualifies electrical weeding. Yeah, we use some machines to do that, to take some of the weeds that we don't want out, and to replace them with the weeds we want as we study the soils.
Okay. There we go. Becky's clarified. Thanks, Becky.
Yeah, great. For those of you who are not seeing this, Becky Sykes has commented, electrical weeding has been taking off in France and other places, quite expensive capital payment, but the manufacturers are certain that it only electrocutes the weeds. Well, I'm sure they would be.
Oh, okay.
But let's hope they're right. So we have got a sort of fundamental question here, which I think is very interesting, and it's one that we get all the time.
Yeah.
And the question is, to what extent is our view that biodynamic and organic practices are the key to sustainable wine production? Now, there's a reason we haven't called this the Regenerative Viticulture Protocol. And that's partly because Peter and I work in other areas of agriculture. In wine, the organic has done more to capture regen than in any other area of agriculture. And so we're very conscious of that. And we don't want to create or be an enabler of any kind of continued split that, organic good, organic regen good, things that aren't organic, not good. We are agnostic. And just before I bring you in here, Peter, it's what we say in English, it's the horses for courses approach. Where you can do it, by all means. And I think what we say is do what delivers the best outcome. But that best outcome has to be financially sustainable. And so I think that's really our mantra. Peter.
This is why we put together our global reference framework. That says this is what sustainable wine looks like. Now, for some people, the means to get to that may involve or can involve organic and or biodynamic practices. In other places, it can't and won't. I was in Prosecco in September last year visiting, and I was with a producer that had been organic, who'd suffered very badly because it had been very difficult to maintain organic practices because of the sheer amount of water they'd had. Also, you then start to stack up if you have to do lots of passes with a tractor, what does that do in terms of carbon emissions from the tractor? So the point is that if organic can be made to work, and in certain areas it's fabulous, great. But if it can't be, it is not the same thing as sustainable. That there's not this sustainable, organic equals sustainable. Organic can equal sustainable, but in other places, organic will not be sustainable. And that's why we focused on there being a principles-based approach, which is applicable whether you're organic, biodynamic, conventional, anything else. The same presumption is the case that the reduction of chemicals, whether those are synthetic or organic ones, needs to happen. And it's not for us to dictate what farming techniques different growers might use, but one of the things that we try and focus on, and okay, we're not involved in consumer-facing work, but is to say that organic is not the king over the water. It can be for some people in some places, but what we need to focus is in sustainability, which is delivered in some cases by organic practices. In other places, it won't be. That's why we have our Sustainable Viticulture Protocol. That is our kind of Bible about what needs to happen. So again, that's coming back to the point why we need to have the Sustainable Viticulture Protocol as a set of principles that can apply no matter what farming techniques you take.
Thank you, Peter. A few related comments coming in here, and then I'll turn over to Anne to see if she has any comments. The same sort of horses for courses approach, I think, applies to two other questions here. One about, a study in Switzerland showing a significant difference in soil diversity between organic, biodynamic, and conventional. Well, that's great. I don't know that study. If that works there and it's affordable and can be economically sustainable, then great. But what happens if you base a business strategy on that study alone, and then you have 3 years of bad weather, and you go bust? That's no good for the land either, because vineyards can sequester more carbon than crops that might replace it. So one has to think long term about this. And again, I think the horses for courses approach, location is everything. That covers also possibly the cover cropping comment here. How should growers manage cover cropping for maximizing carbon sequestration in soil? Well, do the right thing in the right place at the right time is the obvious answer. And of course, some cover crops will work wonderfully in one part of the world, but not so well in the other. So again, this is another reason for the existence of the SVP, and we'd love to know your cover crops in your vineyards and how they're working. And then let's get them from South Africa and from Australia and from southern France, get the same sort of inputs, and we can compare and contrast, and people can learn about what works in different parts of the world. This is sort of the whole point of the SVP, really. But anyway, I think that covers off a couple of questions I was trying to do quickly because we're
Anne
short.
have any comments to make? Because she's the one that's actually doing. Let's get Anne in, because Anne actually does this
That's
stuff
what I was just
every
about to
day.
do, Peter. Yes, Anne, I was just going to turn to you really and say, what are your thoughts on the last few minutes of what you've heard?
In terms of cover cropping, for example?
Well, in terms of any of the comments that you can see or things you've heard in the last few minutes, but if you want to talk about cover cropping, that's fine.
No, what Peter was saying is completely right about, organic and biodynamic. It really depends where you are and what you can do. Again, for me, the main point here is the long term. The sustainability equals long-term vision. And that's what is sometimes missing a lot in the world. And that long-term mission should really motivate all of us who are growing viticulture, who are growing vines, to have with the framework of long-term. Then we're taking steps to make sure these soils are going to be there for the next generation. And whatever we can do that helps for that is fine, and yeah, it depends on the situation of everybody. For the cover cropping, for example, we just try. We try and we find out, okay, this cover crop works better. And when you look at the standard for soil health that we were talking earlier, just look at the plant, listen to the plant. The plant will tell you what you just planted as a cover crop, or the amount of water you've given to it. Is it too much? Is not. You need what we encourage. We put our teams are constantly in the vineyards, looking at the plants. If this is how you learn, they tell you a lot. But then, of course, we need to find a very good way to get all this data of all our people, of all of us who have people in the vineyards collecting data. How now we're going to be able to share all this data and put it in a framework where we can share and learn from each other. That's going to be the challenge, I guess, for you guys.
Yeah.
You're selling our thing for us. That's exactly it. It is about how the information that you're gathering, the information that others are gathering over there, we can bring that together and say, well, collectively, here's learned experience. I mean, cover crops is one example, but it's how can we say, right, well, this is a strategy that makes sense. How can others learn from that? Or indeed, it didn't make sense. We tried something, we cocked up. That's also useful.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Trial and errors.
That's why we have the safe space here. So just to reassure you, if you want to share mistakes, they're not going to end up on a wine blog somewhere, at least not because we've leaked them. They're going to be in our secure, safe space, Glue Up Forum. It's our job to collate. And so actually, perhaps, Delaney, we could finish off hearing from you, because there's an interesting question here from Joanna, talking about as we join as a member of the SVP and we start implementing the guidelines, how do you recommend we present results? Should it be part of our annual sustainability report? So, Delaney, do you want to have a go at that before we close off?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the core part of the best practice sharing, like we mentioned, we'll be conducting some surveys with SVP participants, trying to gather those best practice and communicate them within the SVP in our reports. But secondary to that, there's definitely ways that you can communicate individually as a member, whether that be through your website, your social media, joining us for events and panel discussions, and sharing your experience with the SWR network and beyond. There's a lot of other additional ways to actually get that information out there. But Beyond that, I'd be happy to follow up with you a bit more personally, give you a bit more details on the actual sign up process. And that call goes open to everyone here today. If you're interested to learn a bit more about the actual nitty gritty of joining the SVP or the SWR more broadly, shoot me a message and I'd be happy to set up a call and walk you through it.
Well, thanks very much. We are at time and we like to stay on time. So I think we'll close off here. But thank you all for joining. Thank you so much to Anne for her time and her insights. But also my thanks to you, Peter and Delaney, for the hard work you've done in the background here. Everything we launch like this takes about 2 years. It seems to be a sort of magic sweet spot timeline for us. But what we've learned is we're able to do it quicker than many of the other organizations in the past because we're able to learn from them. And as things move on, we will accelerate, and that'll be up to our members and those sharing with us to help us do that. So we look forward to the journey. We'd love to answer any other questions you've got via email. This will be available as a podcast, so you can forward it on and listen again. We'll try and put out a sort of summary as well with the deck, so you've got that as well. And we'll look forward to welcoming you back to another webinar. And if you're not a listener to our podcasts, you can find us on Spotify and every other podcast platform. Just search for Sustainable Wine or Sustainable Wine Roundtable. So with that, thank you all very much for your time today. Look forward to feedback, and we'll end it here. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone. And thanks, Anne.